Imagine waking up one morning and realizing you'll never have to work another day in your life. Not because you've won the lottery or inherited a fortune, but simply because you've reached a certain age and society has decided you've earned the right to rest. This concept seems so natural to us now, so deeply embedded in our expectations of life, that we rarely stop to question it. But here's something that might surprise you. Retirement, as we know it today, is shockingly new. For most of human history, the idea that people would stop working at a certain age and still have money to live on was not just unusual, it was virtually unthinkable. Think about your great-great-grandparents for a moment. Chances are they worked until they physically couldn't anymore. There was no magical age when they received a gold watch and a pension. They farmed, they crafted, they labored, and when their bodies finally gave out, they relied on their children or their community to care for them. This was the natural order of things for thousands of years. Work wasn't something you retired from. It was something you did until death or disability made it impossible. The very concept of spending the final decades of your life in leisure, pursuing hobbies, traveling, or simply relaxing would have seemed like a fantasy reserved only for the wealthy elite. So what changed? How did we go from a world where working until you dropped was the norm to one where retirement is considered a fundamental right? The answer is a fascinating journey through industrial revolution, economic crisis, political maneuvering, and social transformation. It's a story that reveals as much about human nature and society as it does about economics and policy. Our story really begins in the late 19th century, when the world was transforming at a pace never seen before. Factories were rising, cities were exploding with growth, and the nature of work itself was fundamentally changing. In Germany, a man named Otto von Bismarck was facing a problem. He was dealing with a growing socialist movement that threatened the established order. Workers were organizing, demanding better conditions, and questioning the entire system. Bismarck, who was no socialist himself, came up with a clever solution. In 1889, he introduced the world's first modern social insurance program, which included old age pensions. Here's the twist though. The retirement age was set at 70, at a time when the average life expectancy was nowhere near that. Most workers would never live long enough to collect. It was a political masterstroke, offering a benefit that looked generous, but would cost relatively little because so few would actually claim it. But Bismarck had opened a door that would never fully close. The idea had been planted. Perhaps society had an obligation to care for its elderly workers. Other nations watched with interest, though most were slow to follow. For decades, retirement remained a privilege of the wealthy or a distant promise for the masses. Then came the Great Depression, and everything changed. Picture America in the 1930s. The economy had collapsed. Banks had failed. Millions were unemployed, standing in bread lines, watching their savings evaporate and their dreams crumble. Among the hardest hit were older workers. Companies, desperate to cut costs, pushed out their most expensive employees. Elderly people found themselves not just unemployed, but unemployable. With no jobs, no savings, and often no family able to help, they faced genuine destitution. The suffering was everywhere, impossible to ignore, and it demanded a response. Into this crisis stepped Franklin Delano Roosevelt with his New Deal. In 1935, he signed the Social Security Act, fundamentally transforming American society. For the first time, the government promised that workers who paid into the system throughout their lives would receive benefits when they retired. Initially, the retirement age was set at 65, a number chosen somewhat arbitrarily, but based partly on actuarial calculations and partly on existing precedents. Unlike Bismarck's system, Americans actually had a reasonable chance of living long enough to collect. This wasn't just an economic program, it was a moral statement about the kind of society America wanted to be. The impact was revolutionary, though it didn't happen overnight. In the early years, benefits were modest and coverage was limited. Many workers, especially women, minorities, and agricultural laborers, were initially excluded. But the principle had been established, and over time, the system expanded. What started as a safety net for the desperately poor gradually transformed into an expected part of middle-class life. After World War II, something remarkable happened. The economy boomed, unions grew powerful, and companies began offering their own pension plans to attract and retain workers. Suddenly, retirement wasn't just about avoiding poverty. It could actually be enjoyable. People began to envision their golden years as a time of freedom, travel, and leisure. The dream of retirement entered the American consciousness and became part of the promised reward for a lifetime of labor. But here's where our story takes a turn that should make us think carefully about the present and future. The retirement system that emerged in the mid-20th century was built on certain assumptions. It assumed that people would work for one or two companies their entire careers. It assumed that life expectancy, while increasing, wouldn't extend dramatically beyond the retirement age. It assumed a growing workforce would support retirees through systems like Social Security. It assumed traditional family structures where one person, usually a man, worked while another, usually a woman, managed manage the home, and it assumed steady economic growth that would make promises made today affordable tomorrow. Every single one of those assumptions has been challenged or overturned. People now change jobs frequently, making traditional pensions rare. Life expectancy has increased dramatically. Someone retiring at 65 today might live another 20 or 30 years, not the handful that planners originally anticipated. Birth rates have declined in many developed countries, meaning fewer workers are supporting more retirees. Family structures have diversified, with dual-income households now the norm, and economic growth, while still occurring, has been less evenly distributed, with many workers seeing stagnant wages even as productivity increases. This brings us to a profound question facing our generation. Is retirement, as we've known it, sustainable? And perhaps more importantly, is it even desirable in its current form? Some people argue that we need to raise the retirement age, reasoning that if people are living longer, they can work longer. Others point out that this ignores the reality that many jobs are physically demanding, and not everyone's body holds up equally well. There's also the uncomfortable truth that raising the retirement age disproportionately affects people who've done manual labor their entire lives and are worn out by their 60s, while being less burdensome for those with comfortable office jobs. Then there's the question of purpose. Researchers have found that retirement can be psychologically complex. Some people thrive, finally free to pursue passions they never had time for during their working years. Others struggle with the loss of identity, structure, and purpose that work provided. Depression rates among retirees can be surprisingly high, particularly for those who retire suddenly or without adequate preparation. The question arises, did we invent retirement as a gift to the elderly, or as a way to remove older workers from the labor force? Looking around the world today, we see different cultures grappling with retirement in different ways. In Japan, with its aging population, there's increasing emphasis on keeping older people engaged in the workforce, though often in reduced roles. In some European countries, early retirement has been embraced, while others are raising their retirement ages amid protests. Some societies never fully adopted the Western model of retirement, with multi-generational households remaining the norm, and older people continuing to contribute economically and socially. What can we learn from this history? Perhaps the most important lesson is that retirement isn't natural or inevitable. It's a social construct we created, and we can reshape it. The moral of this story isn't that retirement is good or bad, but that every generation must negotiate the relationship between work, leisure, economic security, and dignity for the elderly based on the realities they face. As you think about your own future, consider this: retirement was invented to solve specific problems of a specific era. The mass destitution of elderly workers during the Depression demanded a response, and retirement systems provided it. But the problems we face today are different. We're living longer, healthier lives. The nature of work is changing, with automation threatening some jobs while creating others. The climate crisis demands economic transformation. These challenges require fresh thinking, not blind adherence to a system designed nearly a century ago. The story of retirement's invention teaches us that we have more power to reshape society than we realize. When faced with elderly poverty, people didn't accept it as inevitable. They created something new based on the moral conviction that human dignity matters. As we face our own challenges, we should approach them with the same creative spirit. Retirement may need to evolve, but the principle that every person deserves dignity and security remains vital. The question is, what kind of society we want to be? And that's a choice each generation must make for itself.